1880s. Like I showed you, they had the two north-south lines, and they didn't have an efficient one that went straight west, so they decided they didn't want to pay for the use of the other one because you always charged a different company more than it cost you to run on it. So originally this was called the Chicago, Madison, and Northern because the north-south line went to Madison as well. We have a copy of one of the original records of sale. Burton Merrifield, Norris Merrifield's father, sold 82 feet right-of-way through his farm, which was on Kelly Road on the south side, where the railroad goes at an angle over to Alworth Station. And they paid, they figured it was 9.45 acres, and they paid $4,250 for that right-of-way. But of course it wasn't handy for the farmer because it split the farm in half, and they had a surface crossing which caused trouble in the future. If you know anything about the roads, the school down there was at Maple Corners below the cemetery at Bridgeland Road, and Bridgeland Road went straight east-west. Now there's a break in it, but the kids walked to school on that. And Winnebago Road ended at Kelly Road, so that they had to make those curves and go down to Edwardsville Road. That was what they named Alworth Road, like they named the station Alworth. And I have a little piece here. Reuben Alworth was born in 1814 in Oneida County, New York, and he came to Winnebago May 5th, 1844. Yeah, that's the station. All the stations on the IC line were similar buildings. The one at Seward was like that, and so forth on west. But Mr. Alworth died in April of 1887, and he had the farm just west on Bridgeland Road from there, and so they decided to name the station. He was the first postmaster of Winnebago Township and basically one of the pioneers, and he'd been a justice of the peace as well. So that the railroad building was ideal to honor him because he was in the neighborhood and then he died. Let's see. I have lots of accidents on this one too. In September of 1888, Jason Isbell was killed at the IC depot in Rockford. He was loading things. They called him a foreman of the Wheeler gang, and and as the train passed by, it sort of sucked him into its path. And he had lived south of Winnebago before, and he was a Civil War veteran and so forth. In 1891, they were acquiring Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad, which ran up and down the Mississippi Valley. and added that to their system. They had another accident in 1902 at the station in Alworth. There was one train sitting there and another one, because it was so snowy you couldn't see, the other train ran into it. And the fireman leaped off, but he hit his head, so they had deaths in that one too. And then it says in April of that same year, 1902, a spark from the freight engine set fire to the stockyards, and they had to go out there and yank off most of the fences so that it didn't spread all the way around, but it was a mess. In 1909, the IC line was advertising trips to Florida and even to Cuba, saying you can beat the winter by going by way of Missouri, I think. I suppose they went to New Orleans and then traveled down that way. It said it was a $1,200 value, whatever that meant. There was a lady right in Rockford that was run down on the tracks from, where the IC station was on South Main Street. But it went through South Rockford, headed out like Cunningham Road does. And this was an unidentified lady that had been hit at the Kent Street intersection, it said. And they had a terrible time figuring out who she was. In 1938, there were photos in Rockford of railroad men who worked for the IC, and Fred, too, was a switchman at that time, and he was here for many years after.
John, I just put up the 1930 pictures.
Okay.
Kind of stay with your chronology.
Well, thank you for reminding me, because I don't look over there otherwise. That's what you saw at Alworth. This was the storefront. There was a regular grocery there. And Mr. Cash started his business out there the first year or two, and then he came into Winnebago. But it was all under the banner of Lester Bowman's business out there. And the office they were using was a rebuilt version of that old station. It was under there somewhere. And it only disappeared when they had the fire in recent years, and all that was removed and replaced. They said in 1939 there were 2 trains between Freeport and Clinton, Iowa. But they wanted to cut it down to 1 because they were losing $23,000 in 1937 on that one particular line. Those were the years when everybody got cars, and so after a while, passenger service didn't pay unless it was long distance. The Isbell family that I mentioned before One of the sisters and her husband were killed when they drove in front of a train in California. So some people had a terrible time with trains. In the 40s or 50s, I didn't have a date on it, the westbound IC train demolished a 2-row corn planter that Albert Wordy was driving at the Merrifield farm.
That was a corn picker.
Corn picker, I'm sorry. And they said that Norris had told them that the crossing needed to be rebuilt, and they didn't do anything with it. I don't know whether he sued them afterwards, but nobody got hurt, and they could hear the train coming, so they ran east and waved at it, and it was only going very slowly by the time it reached the machinery. It had slowed from 75 miles per hour to 30, and so in 1968, the IC installed crossing lights like they still have at the Weldon Road crossing.
John,
Yes.
can you back up and talk about Allworth in 1950? I'm just trying to keep your chronology straight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This was, John Bowman put this on when his dad died, because the Bowman Company was continued by son and son-in-law, Vernon Bowman and Merle Clark. And when they got ready to retire, then they sold it to the company that has it now, which was a good move because they had several great companies up in Wisconsin, and they've continued ever after. That's the building that burned. And you can see where the end piece was the station at one time. You can see the gable of it in the top. Did you have one for the end too?
Oh, we got more in the middle.
Oh, all
We
right.
have accidents.
Yeah, we got
We
accidents,
got
don't we?
accidents.
There was a whole article that the IC had sold off that line to something that was called Chicago Central and Pacific Railroad. It was a private company, and they had 512 miles of line from Chicago to Omaha, just like the map showed you. Wayne had written that article for the Gazette at the time. Let's see. November of 2000.
Oh, wait, we have more before then.
Yeah, that's a derailment.
And then there's this one. I think that one was okay too. Nobody got killed in that one, which
No.
is amazing.
Well, usually if somebody got killed, they were on the road and they were driving toward it and they got tangled with it.
That's one of Wayne's pictures.
Yes, it is. That's the first of the grain tanks on the other side. And nowadays, what are there, 5? All bigger than that.
Here's what, oops. That's what it looks like today,
That's what it looks like.
as of
Okay.
yesterday morning.
You'll have to put that on the bottom so that next time we use this, people know when today was. Nowadays, that line is owned by the Canadian National. And Canadian National came down and bought lines across the US because they didn't have capacity for the double stacks. And so that was something that, you know, you can go out to the harbors in California and get whole trains full of double stacks and run them across the country and make a lot of money. So they wanted to be part of that, but their lines in Canada will take too much modification. So they just bought somebody else's lines and run their trains down through the US instead of, if it's something that needs that. Is that it?
That's it for Allworth. I mean, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
John,
Yes.
there was two different truck accidents there.
Yes, that's true.
And you're coming, fellows were killed.
Right. If I didn't file it under the railroad, I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one was a milk truck, that's right. Well, why don't you do the first one on the,
Oh, here.
John, when was the last passenger to get out of Allworth?
well, at Seward, when Rob Marston gave his report there, he said, several of you said that there were, after passenger service was gone, they picked up people on special request for school trips. For example, they'd go into Rockford and come back because the kids had never ridden the railroad, and so that was just a sampling of, you know. But the last passenger service from Rockford, you could go in and take it, and you went, well, one went from Dubuque to Chicago, and I once went in 1961. I got on that train and went to Chicago, and then I had to ride a cab to the other station down the Dan Ryan, and I rode to St. Louis, and then I rode to San Antonio, and then we went to the border at Laredo and crossed. See, I went to a travel agency downtown in Rockford, and she said, "This is first class." Well, when you got into Mexico, you got on a train, and first class didn't mean for tourists. It meant the local. And the sand blew in. It was so hot. And all night long, you'd stop in these endless little villages. Some of them didn't even have electric. And they would get on the train and desperately try to sell you things all night long. I went all the way to Mexico City, and the next day, I was going to Guadalajara, and I had to get on another local train and go there. And it was V-shaped, so it was way out of the way. After that, when I was in Latin America, I took the Greyhound. I once bought a ticket in Guatemala City for Chicago, and it cost me $60 for the whole thing. And you had to keep changing, but you got where you wanted to go. That's extra commentary.
John, if I could interrupt.
Yes.
So his story reminded me a little bit of one of, I think probably, undoubtedly, my last train trip. And some of you may have been drafted into the Army about the same time I was. So we had to board a train in Rockford at the South Main Station there, go to Chicago, and then I don't remember how we transferred, but then we ended up going to St. Louis overnight,
And Fort Leonard Wood.
and then from St. Louis to Fort Leonard Wood. It was like a cattle train, I think. It was old and rickety, and yeah.
Well,
So, some of you may remember those.
When I
days.
went from St. Louis to San Antonio, it was filled with draftees. They were going down there for their training. So. Okay, the interurban. This is an electrified line that went as an extension of the trolleys in Rockford. This line went as far as Freeport. There was another line that went out east through Cherry Valley and Belvedere, and you could get trolley lines that would take you all the way into Chicago if you wanted. And then the other line was north from Rockford, and it went through a number of little stops in what's now the Harlem district, and that was the reason they consolidated the schools about 1920, and they closed 4 one-room schools and opened the old Harlem district school, and they could all ride the thing up and down, you see. So they could commute to the consolidated school. And that went to Rockton, and you could go up to Beloit and Janesville on that one. So there was quite a bit of in and out travel. The line that came here was, it says here that in Rockford, the Street Railway Company was formed in 1881, and they bought their materials and so forth, and they had lines close in, even closer in than what the bus lines do now in town. There was one on North Winnebago Street, and it made a loop right in that neighborhood and went back downtown and so forth. Most of them didn't have a conductor on them, they just had the man who was the motorman. But starting in 1902, they built the Rockford and Interurban Company, and that came out here and reached Winnebago in 1903. And as we sort of said before, that was, the line went by Lincoln Park School, where they had the underpass there, and then it went by Weldon Corner, parallel to US 20, and the teacher at Faulkner School would ride it out from Rockford, and she walked down past Cunningham Road to get to her school, and back again every day. In the fields from where Herb's brother lives on the highway, it looped up through the field, and it went into Bluff Street at the end, and the tracks were in the street, and it ended up right in front of this. And that continued on west and rejoined the well, after that it paralleled the railroad. They didn't try to go back the way it had been. And there were stations at Rydot and so forth. There was a stopping point where Orlena Sarf used to live. That was, they had a barn there, and if people wanted to leave their horses there for the day when they rode into town, they would do that, and then they'd pick them up again on the way home. It delivered mail, it delivered packages of various sizes and so forth as well. These are different notes, and so I'm having more trouble. The Interurban Company was capitalized at $1 million. It wasn't cheap. And some of the first people in Winnebago who got electricity hadn't hatched onto their line. Some of the people along Bluff Street and so forth, because there was, you know, like the Presbyterian Church didn't, you know, there wasn't power when it was built in 1914. They had a generator, and they ran those little lights that were on either side of the choir loft and so forth with those. The first time they got in trouble was in 1926. They went into receivership, and reorganized. I suppose that meant they borrowed more money. And eventually it ended up, it was all owned by a public service corporation in Chicago.
John,
Yes,
talk about what's on the screen.
What's that?
That would be the car barn at Kishwaukee Street and First
oh,
Avenue.
okay, yes. And that's where all the trolley cars went at night, from the city as well as the other.
I mean, that's just a really
That's a
good.
nice, modern,
And then here's the,
there's a schedule of trains. It went every hour or two. It wasn't fast, but it went where you wanted to go.
and then this should be famous.
They said they ran into a cow.
Okay, and then,
That's the inside of the station. They had to have a power plant at each point, and so that was one of the rooms. And W.R. McDonald was the station agent at one time when these pictures were shown. I think we got those out of a collection that somebody had put together, and we copied them out.
Do we know how that power was generated?
Well, I don't,
I'm just
there's,
curious whether it was.
there's,
I can answer that.
okay, please.
That's an AC converter. It takes the DC and converts it into AC power, and running under 600 volts. So that boosts the power when you get further out on the line.
oh,
There's one at the Illinois Railway Museum in Barn 4, if you want to see one.
At Union,
Yes.
yeah.
okay. But their main power source was somewhere in Rockford?
Yes, there were 2 or 3 power stations. There was one up by Jefferson, and in Rockford they took it from the Fordham Dam.
Okay,
The power
so
plant
they
is
used
dam.
water power and converted it.
So this one was just like to boost the power back
Right,
up
yeah.
again.
It's what they call a
I
converter.
think they had like transformers
Mhm.
Yeah,
in here and then back in town every so far.
right. The depot's on Bluff Street, just west of Elida. South of the library, across the street.
Yes, very current.
It's basically the same brick building, but
It's got that
Warren
add-on.
Jones had it, and he added this little piece, and he put a new roof on it.
in the city of Rockford, was it owned by Rockford in the
I
beginning?
think it was, yes.
My,
Thank you.
my grandmother remarried a colonel. His name was Edward Clark, and his first wife was Irma Groneman. And I have a pamphlet that shows that he was the director of all that in Rockford at the turn of the century.
Wow,
That was a big layout.
yeah.
Well, let's see what else I can make out. The revenue peak for passengers was in 1919. Freight revenue, the peak was in 1920. And as time went on, they were competing with trucks and with passenger cars. And the Greyhound stopped on 20 at Winnebago Corners. So if somebody was ambitious enough, they could walk up from there. Okay, do you want to hear? I've got a lot of snippets. Do you want to hear them?
Excuse me.
It says,
One moment.
yeah,
My grandparents lived right across the street from at that time when I was a young little baby, it was called Bates's Garage, maybe some remember
certainly.
that.
Yeah.
But I saw that power plant in the back, in that back wall, and there's a hole that went down the wheel and down the flywheel, down the hole in the floor. And I remember, I always thought it was a pit that worked on cars, but maybe that was the tip of that wheel was down in the base at. But when I was real little, on this side, there was a door on each side, and Bates's Garage was in there, and he worked on cars, and some of the old boys went over and hung out and talked. And the middle room in the front there, where it looks like the ticket office is at, there was a large book cabinet there. And when I was real little, you could go in there and then put in and open the right door, and you had a cigar box, and you could throw in a nickel and get a can up or a bottle pop at that time out of a little machine on the floor. And you had that great big bookcase when Mr. Bates, I don't know what, I think it became the vault place after he left there.
Yes.
But
Gales.
my uncle Vern Straley got that big bookcase, and my father had it for a long time, and he gave it to me, and I've had it for about 40 years. And I was hoping there might be a picture of inside the ticket area to confirm that that bookcase was originally there with the Interurban. I don't know. I've got a picture with me. I don't know if anybody, I don't know when the Interurban went out of business, but if anybody might have seen that in the area.
Well, that I have, but I was delaying it, but.
Oh, okay.
It's-
Well, maybe it'll confirm what I've always thought, that